Welcome, guys, to this week's episode of Heavy Metal Tones with your podcast host, Tony Evans. The first of the spooky episodes for the spooky month of October. We are heading into that time of year again, one of my favourite times of the year. I'm not a Halloween person as such. That's pretty obvious. You know, I don't deck my house up and all that kind of schmoly that the Americans love to do, and, you know, good on them. I just like the chance to watch horror movies and to just revel in the occult and spiritualism and paranormal as much as I can, because I'm allowed to at this time of year. Not that I'm not allowed to any time of year. Of course I'm allowed to do it any time of year. It doesn't bother me. But it's just nice that you get that. Anyway, we start the month strong with... Also, I've got a header planned for this month, some really interesting. I've got a surprise episode for actually Halloween on the 31st. It will be a 2-episode week, that one. But more of that later in the coming weeks. But for now, we're talking about Heads for the Dead. Now, it's no surprise to listeners of the show that they know I absolutely adore and admire the band Heads for the Dead. Came across them, gosh, it was almost 5 years ago now, when I was writing reviews for Metal Ruse, and it popped up in the feed, and I thought, oh, let me have a listen to this, and I just fell in love with it. It was Slash and Roll, the first EP that I heard from them, and it went from there. Ralph Halber is a friend of mine. We often chat online, and we chat quite regularly. In fact, I've interviewed him for the show. He sends me fantastic stuff that I get for the band. His other bands, Rot Pit, Revel in Flesh as well. They're the two other bands that he is with. But I know him mainly for Rot Pit and Heads for the Dead. His vocal stylings have matured. They've got so much better. I loved them even in the early days, but it's something that's happening. Each album becomes more and more mature. This is their 4th studio album and their first since their 2023 EP, In the Absence of Faith. Now, I said at the time, this is going to be a really, really hard record to follow, because In the Absence of Faith, if you go back, and I'll link the show notes below, the episode numbers, if you go back and listen to my talk about that and to my interview with Ralph, it is a superb EP. Now, for those who don't know who Heads for the Dead, what they basically do, as a band, they are horror movie focused. They call themselves horror death metal, right? Or death horror metal, or whichever way you want to call it. It is exactly what it says on the tin. It's horror movie inspired death metal, right? And when we say horror movies, we're talking the gambit, okay? It doesn't have to be, it's not the Frankensteins and the mummies of the 1930s. It's there, yes, but they're more focused on their slasher sort of phenomena of the sort of 1980 onwards, the more extreme of cinema, the more dark side of cinema, which tends to go well with death metal, because things like Dracula and the Mummy and Frankenstein, they're more your gothic, they're more your traditional metal sounds that go well with that, whereas this is a far, far heavier band. In fact, this is the heaviest that they've made. So they say. They say that it is the heaviest album they've ever produced. I think that I'd like to agree with that. You know what I mean? I think I'd like to agree with that. I think it is definitely the heaviest thing they've ever done, right? So, you can hear from their catalogue way back when the first album was released. Yes, as I said, the first album was released, which is Serpent's Curse, 2018. That it formed in 2017, I believe. And then you had Into the Red, which is one of my favourites. Absolutely love that album, in 2020. And then you get, in 2021, we've got Slash and Roll, which is the EP that I first heard them on, which is, again, the first time they dived into the horror movie theme, really in a massively hard way. And then 2022's The Great Conjuration, which is 3, The Great Conjuration. It's a third album. An album that I adore, I love all their stuff, but it's the one album that I find a little harder to break into sonically, but it's still one of the ones I go back to listen to quite often. And then we have In the Absence of Faith in 2023, which is the very much focused on horror movie themes, because we have The Exorcist and all sorts of things covered in that EP. Now we have this one, okay, which is the classic new album, and it's still a classic because I've listened to it so many times already. Heads for the Dead, Never Ending Night of Terror is the new album. It came out on Pulverized Records, their second for the label, and it was released on the 10th of the 10th, 2025. So those listening in the future, that's when it was released, only a few days ago for me as of the time of recording. The band itself revolves around John Peterson on guitars, bass, keyboards, and effects. There's Ralph Halber on vocals and lyrics, Matt Malotti on guitars, and Evan Daniel on drums. Now he's new, he's only just come in, but man, he absolutely crucifies the drums on this. Playing time is 41 minutes and 18 seconds. The track listing is The Vastness of Time, Death Mask, Phantasmagoria, In Disgust We Trust, Never Ending Night of Terror, Give Me Life, The Harvester, The Shape of Light Bleeds Black, The Very Last, and Witch Krieg, The Goblin Tribute. Now we'll talk about those as we always do in the second half. We'll go over the movies that they are paying homage to and the music that behind it. Now, in the 10 tracks at present that are presented by vocalist Ralph Halber of Revel in Flesh and Rock Pit fame, is an overall more extreme album, he says, in all aspects. There's an even stronger emphasis on the intense cinematic vibe focused on our favourite slasher movies, driven by revenge, violence, and of course fear. Citing such classics as David Cronenberg's Videodrome, Roman Polanski's Repulsion, and the original Friday the 13th, Stuart Gordon's The Beyond, and Reanimator. We will talk about that in the second half. So as he said, he even said to me before I even heard an advance copy, and I did hear it quite in advance, he said that it was more intense and dark and heavier, and I actually think it is, but I think it's more complex. With In the Absence of Faith, it was becoming more complex, particularly with Moletti on it, on guitars. It was becoming far more intense and textured and layered, less brutally in your face like that of the previous albums. Even Slash and Roll was getting that way. It was sort of moving towards that way. I think with and this is only by contention. Oh, not contention. What's the word? Subjection. No. Conjecture. I'm thinking of deck chairs. Conjecture. Even with this is only conjecture, but I'd say that with Ralph, particularly, and Peterson expressing their extremities in, say, Rock Pit, I think when they get to Heads for the Dead, they spend more time. They spend more time on the textures and layers and less brutality. I mean, Johnny Peterson's in bands like Wombbath as well, and Revel in Flesh. So it's been they're musicians that play a lot together with each other in different forms or another. It is a cult classic kind of album. It's an album where if you know your cult horror movies, you're going to know the basics behind this album, and if you don't, this is what I'm here for. I'm going to guide you through that. Now, the lyrics were entirely penned by Halber based on aforementioned movies, but also adding a fictional aspect to them too. So, even though that you'll hear sampling throughout the album, you'll hear lyrical mentions and words mentioned, you'll notice that there was a couple of tracks on the album which are almost not movie related at all. In fact, they aren't. They're just homage to the form of the movie of which we're listening to, right? The lineup itself now has Matt Moletti, as I mentioned. Since 2002, he was on The Last Absence of Faith from the band Sentient Horror on lead guitars, and for the first time, Evan Daniel, also from Sentient Horror and also from Dead and Dripping, on drums. Now, they're all self-proclaimed horror freaks. Italian artist solo Marcello, Pentagram, Zach Sabbath, and Black Spice is for the first time responsible for the artwork. So the artwork is slightly more, reminds me more of the VHS covers you'd pick up when you were looking through the horror section as a teenager. You know, it's that real sort of, it tells you all straight away on the cover. You know, it may overpromise, but it underperforms sometimes. You know, the movies, the covers looked great, but then when you got the movies in, they were pretty awful a lot of the time. You only really wanted it for the claret. You only wanted to see the blood splatter everywhere and the creatures and the creature effects. All right. It's based on Johnny and Ralph's vision, you know, of what they feel that slasher movies were about. You know, he's got the mask hanging in there, like that of all the great, you know, of the 80s, all the great serial killer slasher characters in the 80s. You know, Mike Myers, Jason Voorhees, of course, Nightmare on Elm Street. Right, you got all that in there. It also has a sort of like, it almost looks like the Sodom character, their logo character that they use, a bit like that, bit like almost it's twin almost, right? But it's because the music is full of monsters, serial killers, nightmares, and there is also a special number at the end that pays homage. It's a great word, that homage, isn't it? It sounds a bit like fromage, to Italian progmaster's Goblin. Excuse me, my headphones are playing me up. Yeah, there we go. And we'll get to that in the end. But they quote this. In fact, this is how Ralph quotes the music: "Horror metal of death" is how we label our style. But in the end, it's death metal at its in capital letters. I absolutely 110% agree with that. I really do. John Peterson is solely responsible for all the songwriting and concepts behind the album. So musically, he writes all the music. Ralph writes the lyrics. It was recorded and mixed mostly by John Peterson, and the rest of the recording sessions were done in parts of Germany and the USA. The mastering was done by Roger Bergston at Nouveau Mastering. He did, who did Paranoid and so on. The cover artwork for Neverending Night of Terror, as I mentioned, was Sir Marcello. He's done Pentagram and Fulci, particularly Fulci. I love Fulci artwork cover. Again, we cover some of the lyrics here, cover Fulci movies. It is for fans of horror and death metal. It is fans of movie soundtracks. It's like early Paradise Lost. It's like Necrophagia. These bands quite comfortably are in the same kind of sound. I absolutely love this kind of thing because it's really something that I grew up with, something that I'm really, as I've got older, a little less passionate about because, you know, you get married, you have kids, you don't watch as much of that because you spend your time relaxing with your family. And so things like horror movies, which were part of my sort of, I don't know, just really part of my life from a long period. From the age of 5 or 6, when my father would have me sit up and watch Hammer horror movies with him. Now, you might roll your eyes now, these new parents, and go, oh my God. Well, I wasn't scarred by it. In fact, I was inspired by it. I went into the special effects industry because of it. I made a living because of it. It was sort of part of who I was for a long time. In fact, I toyed up with doing a horror movie podcast and even a website about that. But I thought there's a lot of those around, so I'm actually just happy to roll this into the music aspect of it. It's one of the reasons why I like the extremity of the heavy metal side, of the extreme side of heavy metal. I like that because I like the extremity of horror movies. I like the shock factor, the ability to create a response both viscerally and visually and emotionally from a two-dimensional series of images. This is basically it on the screen. I really find that a powerful emotional force. Say with music, it's the way it creates those emotional nuances between you and the band and the listener. So I find that I find that very fascinating. I always have done. I err towards, to be honest, I'm a huge Hammer horror fan, as you probably know, right? I love all the Hammer horror stuff. I really do. But I'm more geared towards the video nasty part of the world, the extremity of horror cinema, because my it was like all great things that you really want, you can't have. I grew up a little bit too young to be able to go and just rent videos on my own. Well, yes, young, but also we didn't have a video recorder. We didn't have a video recorder, yeah, as Viv would say on the young ones. We didn't have a video recorder for many, many years. And so when we got one, by the time we got one as a family, or I have one in my bedroom, I should say, my parents never ever had one, was everything was already had been illegal or sanitized, cleaned, and so to get your eyes around these so-called horror movies that you weren't allowed to watch, and let's be honest, that's probably one of the reasons why I was so enamored by them, was that you had to go and do slightly dodgy things. We would go to a shop in Camden called Psychotronics. It was a back street little shop now, about tiny little shop about the size of my studio, and it just was wall to wall VHS videos, posters. It was a place for the nerd, the horror movie, science fiction nerd in you. It was wonderful, and we knew the owners quite well. There were quite a couple of these sort of rockabilly types, and they would we got to know them so well, and they knew we would pay, that when the shop was empty, they'd close it up, put the close sign up. We'd go out the back, and he had wall to wall, you name it, he had it. And you paid for it. Yeah, you had to pay big, because it was what they could get done for. Fines and imprisonment was quite sturdy at that time. So we picked up things like. God, we got the original uncut Evil. We always want uncut copies. Why would we want a cut copy, right? Unrated most of the time. We got an Australian print of Bloodsucking Freaks. We had a fantastic print of Dawn of the Dead. At that time, I'd never seen an uncut copy of it. Same with Evil Dead. I could rattle them all off. Nightmare in a Damaged Brain, Suspiria, Tenebrae, all that. Zombie, Gates of Hell, The Beyond. All these stuff that that was stupidly banned, some of it unnecessarily so, but it made you want to watch them more because of the criminal act that it became illegal to have these. It was very much, sorry, off topic. It was very much like in America. If you're not quite sure why, it's very much like your Satanic Panic, equivalent of the American Satanic Panic. It was a bit like that, really. Anyway, that's why I was sort of more keen towards there, because horror movies like the wondrous Hammer movies, which in fact I did my O-level oral dissertation on, the rise and fall of Hammer cinema. I still remember that. I was very fondly got very high remarks for that. Anyway, that's how addicted I was to those things as a kid. Yes, so if those things like the Hammer movies, like the great classic horror movies of their time, the Universal monsters and all that, they were more sanitized. They weren't scary. They weren't realistic. They were just dripping through, as they would say, Kensington gore, which was the color of the blood they used to use. And so, yes, when you're young, it's quite shocking, but it wasn't. It was almost, I was slightly wanted more. I was a bit desensitized by it. I needed just something a little bit more in your face. You know what I mean? And this is carried on now through my whole life, really. Music, art, cinema. It's always, I look for something that is going to viscerally create an emotion in me. It doesn't matter. I mean, we all know, listen to my show that it doesn't matter what music is, what form of music, as long as it elicits a response whether it's beautiful, whether it's sardonic, whether it's aggressive, whether it's heavy, fast, slow, it doesn't matter. It's an emotional response I'm looking for at that particular time when I choose that music. And when I go to choose music like Heads for the Dead and their music and music like that, it is paying tribute to my 13-year-old self and 14-year-old self, scouring the video shops looking for copies that got underneath the radar, like Cannibal Ferox and Make Them Die Slowly, and Cannibal Zombie Holocaust, all those brilliant Italian exploitation movies of the late 70s and early 80s, where there was no boundaries, where it was a Wild West. And that, for me, is why I listen to this, because I'm just picture myself sometimes in those spaces, and it makes me feel comforting, actually. People say, why is it such a horrible music? Why such a horrible music? And they say horrible to me. It's not horrible. People have said it to me, and I get it. I understand. If you don't understand this music, I really do. Each unto their own. But it's not horrible music. There's a beauty in all darkness. There was a beauty in the depths of places you do not want to look, or don't dare to look. Anyway, right now we're going to wrap up this side. Now, as a little surprise, if you listen this far, so far, we're going to play a track from a band called April 16th. Now, they reached out to me a few weeks ago, and they're sending me a CD. They've been around since the mid-80s. They are a band that straddled, in the UK, they straddled the new wave of British heavy metal around that time, releasing one album and then disbanding and going their way. They're back now. Here was a brief history of the band. Hailing from London, hard rock outfit April 16th began their live careers in the summer of 1985. Initially gigging mainly in the southeast, they soon began to perform throughout the UK and later into France. Musically, April 16th always preferred a raw guitar-based sound to that of the cleaner and less real sound afforded by keyboards. The band's rough edge was further enhanced by the use of one single vocalist instead of the more traditional backing vocal setup. Philosophically, the band truly believed in the power of rock music as a form of expression. Their stage presentation was a totally unpretentious and honest, yet powerful and exciting experience. April 16th despised the use of stage clothing, overhyped theatrical performances, and larger-than-life egos. At gigs, you would find them and talk to them at the band, or they're at the bar, or next door, or in the pub, or not in their locked away in their dressing room. Early recordings of the band generated a lot of interest at many regional radio stations and helped pave the way for April 16 to broaden their gigging horizons. Those same recordings also met the considered interest from a number of record companies, eventually leading to the release of their debut album entitled Sleepwalking in January of 1989. The old yet new, fast but slow feel of Sleepwalking soon caught the eye of national rock publications, and full-page features appeared in several leading magazines. Radio 1 invited April 16 to record a session for the Tommy Vance Rock Show, and this shortly followed by a feature on London Weekend Television, helped lay the foundations upon which the success of the band was built. April 16 performed in 1985 and ran until 1991, when bankruptcy forced their exit from the front line of the new wave of British heavy metal. Essentially, this band were a very loud, no-frills rock quintet, who were hell-bent on success. Sadly, whilst coming close to achieving their ambitions, they eventually failed. Yes, they have, maybe there, but they're on their way back. And with our help, we can get them where they deserve to be. Because you're going to love this single, Sleepwalking, which you're going to listen to in a second. Thanks for listening to it. Do go and go to their Spotify page, go to their Facebook page, go to their website page. I'll put all the links in the show notes below. You can go there. And as I said, we're interviewing them in a few weeks' time. Anyway, over to the single, Sleepwalking. And you're going to love it. Play it loud. Play it loud. Bye for now. See you on the other side.
Let's leave this crazy world behind and say what they may. This newfound place is yours and mine, but he says the creature stirs. The creature stands and claims his foes in the mind. So sublime, what you can't see, the dreamer does. And it's tearing me apart, yeah. But what can I do? In the hours of darkness, the truth comes crashing through. Broken skies, seas of fire. We can be anywhere we want tonight. They don't know where we go. To future days on back in time. They can move, ain't no rules. This land is fit for kings and fools. Burning up, breaking out. You can cry but no one hears you shout. And it makes me feel so good. Don't be scared, my friend. Nocturnal desperation will reach us in the end. Let's leave this crazy world behind and say what they may. This newfound place is yours and mine, but he says, creature does. The creature stands and claims his foes in the mind. So sublime, what you can't see, the dreamer does. And it's tearing me apart, baby. But what can I do? In the hours of darkness, the truth comes crashing through.
That was Sleepwalking by April 16th. The band I will be interviewing as we speak, this weekend coming, hopefully. And then we will be out, as I said, this episode will be out sometime in November, probably early November, I would say. Anyway, where do we go from here? What were we talking about in the first part? We were talking about horror movies and Heads for the Dead and their new album, Never Ending Night of Terror, and the direction in which they were going. And as I said, I think this is the most accomplished of their albums so far. Sounding the most, just the most polished. Now, you might say, Tony, but you don't want polished extreme metal. No, I don't, genuinely. But when it's this kind of music, I really love the way that there is you can feel you can viscerally hear growth in the band. You do want your music to grow, surely. You don't want it always to be, um, you know, Number of the Beast or Highway to Hell or wherever. You do want some growth in your music, and this band is showing that quite openly with this one. So what I said before is we're going to go with each track. Uh, not going to go through the lyrical content of it. We're just going to go through each track and basically what the movie is related to, and some of the musical content of it. And the first track is Vastness of Time. Now this is based on the Lucio Fulci movie The Living Dead, City of the Living Dead, or Gates of Hell. And if I really feel that I want to offend my Italian listeners, Pura nella City del Morte Vivente. I've got that. All those Italian listeners now have turned off. At this point, this is Lucio Fulci's 45th movie. In 1980. That's crazy. 45 movies by 1980. Now, a lot of them were giallo movies. A lot of them were nudie cuties. A lot of them were just, as Italians like to do back in the 60s and 70s, they were genre hopping and taking on what was ever popular in America and in Europe. This is a very viscerally graphic movie, as in all of Lucio Fulci's movies. None of his movies really are easy on the eye. There's a lot of blood, a lot of violence, a lot of eye violence. Zombie Flesh Eaters has the wooden splinter in the eye. The Beyond has a head against a nail where it comes out through the eye. All sorts of things, right? There's a lot of violence, a lot of entrails, a lot of what they like to call them eye zooms. There's a lot of Fulci eye zooms, as the great as one great comedian once said. And so, for me, in fact, I've always thought that'd be a good name for a band, Fulci eye zoom. This song, it is exactly like a Fulci movie. It's not starting with a little tiny bit of let's have a couple chatting in a cafe, and then it builds up. There's no exposition here. This is just straight in your face. No hostages taken here. No quarter given. This is Ralph right out the blocks vocally. The music itself uses the opening tagline, as is quite a thing common with this band, from the trailer for the movie Gates of Hell and City of the Living Dead, whichever title you want to call it. It's it's something that they do so well. They love their medium so much that when it comes to imbuing it into a musical form, it's not that hard for them to do. Because they sort of know these movies intimately in some respects. I first came across Lucio Fulci diving through video shops as a teenager and getting a really bad, awfully cut version of Zombie Flesh Eaters, or Zombie with a Z-O-M-B-I, as it was called in Italy. And, it has a ridiculous scene with a zombie underwater fighting a shark. There's some very, very stupid parts of this movie. But also at the same time, it has a lot of extreme viscera that really attacks you straight in your right in the throat. And it's exactly musically what the band is doing here. The music often for Lucio Fulci movies is by a composer called Fabio Frizzi, and I think this is Fabio Frizzi's soundtrack here. As I said, it's very much a Goblin-esque kind soundtrack, as most Italian cinema was then. But the band themselves roll it in. They roll all these textures. The story itself for the movie is a priest commits suicide and opens up the gates of hell, and the dead, rise, and evil things happen. And so, there's lots of wailing and souls crying in pain, and all this across the soundtrack, and very stabbing kind of angular soundtrack in parts. And the band really mix that in beautifully into this opening track. As I said, it is straight away a nightmarish textured sense of hell. The perfect follow-up for me for the On From the Absence of Faith. This album, it's almost like they were made in the same session, even though they're years apart. It really is a grown-up extreme metal album straight from the gate. They always were a hard band, but they're even harder now. They're even more extreme now, which I find very, very satisfying, because the growth. Oops, sorry, I hit the mic. The growth is coming. That you can sense that, and there's layers and textures that you weren't getting on, the very first album, or even the second album, and even the third album. I think from Absent to this, there has been a marked change. And I said in the first half, I think it's because they can express themselves in a more ultra extreme way in bands like Rock Pit and Revel in Flesh and Wombbath, all this sort of stuff. So, brilliant way to open the movie, straight into a Fulci track. You couldn't ask for much more. In fact, the only thing I'd like is a whole album dedicated to Fulci. He is my favourite Italian extreme cinema director. Oh, I forgot to mention for you horror movie buffs following along with this, if you haven't seen this movie, it is part of a trilogy that he produced with House on the Edge of the Bay. It was produced, you have House by the Cemetery and The Beyond. They're the trilogy that he made for the so-called trilogy. It's very loosely linked. A lot of Dunwich horror kind of imagery, very much a H.P. Lovecraft kind of ideas that come across in Fulci, because that was very in at the time. Now we move to the second track, which is where are we here? Let me turn over. Death Mask. Right, this is a straightforward, actually. It's quite easy to understand this one if you know what you're listening for. This one is based solely on Friday the 13th Part 1, Death Mask. Now, you could say, is it Mike Myers from Halloween? No, it's definitely like Friday the 13th, because they mention in the lyric Crystal Lake, which is the lake that is all set around, where all happens on that Friday the 13th, with Jason Voorhees, or is it? I won't ruin the movie if you haven't seen it. Of course, Friday the 13th came out in 1980. It's Sean S. Cunningham's first movie, and the biggest movie he did. The special effects were by Tom Savini. It cost $650,000 to make, and it got back $59 million in the box office. Now, one of the reasons that this movie was so popular was its extreme violence. Tom Savini's realistic portrayal of violence is something, as a special effects artist myself, I've really, really admired. He's my favourite. I've always admired him greatly. He was in Vietnam, so he saw. He was a Vietnam vet photographer, so he saw all firsthand the stuff that was going on with severed limbs and explosions, dead bodies and so on. And what makes Friday the 13th such a sort of a cult classic, and sometimes some people may really viscerally hate it, is because it is quite a mean and misogynistic movie, where it's quite simple. It's teens making out, and if you make out and you're a teen, you're going to get killed by Jason around the lake somewhere. It's quite, some of the deaths are very, very over the top, but also at the same time very realistic. Unlike Halloween, where a lot of those deaths you sort of didn't really see. You saw it but didn't see it. It was almost what you didn't see was this was one step forward This was the first real American outing of this kind of nature. There's all been extreme movies. Herschel Gordon Lewis, Wizard of Gore, 2000 Maniacs, things like that. Their Blood Feast. They were very badly made, but they were very graphic. And so but it was almost, you could tell that it was a lamb's tongue, or it was a mannequin with some meat attached to it. It was just shocking because it was gory and in Technicolor. This was far more realistic. And so how do they catch it in music? Well, actually really well. They really make quite a catchy song, actually. In fact, probably the most catchiest song on the album. It's also very kind of trad death metal. It's certainly a little bit more easy on the ear if you're not used to this kind of music. Now, that doesn't mean it's laid back or simple. It's still extreme, people, but it's a little bit more, a little bit more musical, I think is the term. But there's a bit in Friday the 13th where they used like audio cues where it was like things like that, a bit like that, like they did in Halloween. And so these sort of audio cues flow through into the Friday the 13th. What the band have used in the music background is a little audio clues that make you feel a little bit uneasy and a little bit trepidatious, if you know what I mean. I know another long word. It's a wheelbarrow, but don't ask me how to spell it. Anyway, there is a great lyric where it says, "There is no life behind his eyes," and if you haven't seen the movie and you're watching it for the first time this Halloween, you will see that there is a very cold deliberateness to this murderer, and the way that he consumes his victims is quite. It's almost. It is unbelievable, but it's just so cold compared to what was happening at the time. I believe that Sean S. Cunningham was connected with, Last House on the Left, and things like that. So there is some connection with extreme cinema before Friday the 13th, but this is the most mainstream of it. Now, I saw it originally on a cut print. In America, movies used to be the case, and I don't know if they still are, but you'd have unrated, X, and then R, and then M, and so on. Now, unrated means there's no cuts to it whatsoever, but it gets a very, very limited cinema release. X is usually connected with pornography. A lot of extreme movies had to go out as an X. Then R, of course, is what adults could take their 15-year-old kids to. So it was usually a lot tamer. Still, probably a little bit graphic or a bit horrific, but a lot tamer than the unrated or the X prints. And of course, then you go down. And so it was, a lot of these stuff got trimmed, not because the audiences couldn't take it. A lot of it is because they didn't want the audience to. They didn't want to limit the release of the movies, the amount of money they spent. They want it in as many cinemas as they can get. And this is one of the very, very first, along with Halloween, that did this. It sort of became a little more watchable because of the edits in it. Not the same with the music. Yes, it's catchy. Yes, it's hard, but it really captures that coldness that you get with the killer of Jason and the horrific murders that he unleashes upon those teenagers at the camp around Lake Crystal Lake. Sorry, yeah, it is. It's one of my favorite of the slasher genres movies because it's the first of its kind, really, and also one that was not apologetic. Along with things like The Burning and possibly things like maybe Prom Night and things like that, even though that's not that graphic, but those sort of teenage movies around like Carrie and all that, where they were aiming at the fear of what the teenagers were going through, sort of a retrospective, or not retrospective, maybe a look at what actually teenagers were living through at the time. It's quite interesting. Love this track, love this movie. Great way of linking it. I'd recommend seeing the movie first and listen to the track, or listen to the track and then see the movie, whichever you want to do it. But either way, it's a real good compliment. Death Mask, great second track on the album. What nasty, nasty, nasty film are we going to think about now? Well, Nextly. Nextly, is that a word? It might not be, but it could be now. It's a perfectly cromulent word. Phantasmagoria is the next track. This is now Heads of the Dead have, and particularly Ralph in his vocals, have a certain motif of which they produce their sound. It's very much unique to them, and I feel that with this particular track, this is very much that dramatic, cinematic, textured, devastatingly heavy and dark sound that they make. It really is right spot on. And this one, now Phantasmagoria actually means living in a dreamlike state, you know, a different reality, and if you will. And this is based on the movie Videodrome, which is David Cronenberg at his best, in my opinion. He's made so many amazing, crazy movies over the time, but he's well known for his body horror movies of the late 70s, early 80s, with the Shivers, Rabid, The Brood. Dead Ringers is another classic one that was also body horror, but much later on. Wasn't really, it was more in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. You know, his version of Naked Lunch, you know, he's done some, and also The Fly. You know, his most probably successful movie is The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. Now, this movie was, I believe, was a movie that changed the way that David Cronenberg made movies, because it was his first real sort of major Hollywood success, and so he looked at really adding in some intense, not with Scanners, well, that was another one of his, with movies like Shivers and Rabid. They're very to the point. Yeah, they're based on sexual, the mores of society and the fear of sexual diseases and STDs, and the fear of promiscuity, and the run on from the 60s into the 70s, and free love and so on. But with Videodrome, it was a much more intense. You know, there's lots of, and pardon my French here, mindfuckery going on. You know, it's very visceral, very graphic. It has some beautifully odd and sumptuous strangeness that does translate later on into Naked Lunch, actually. You know, the bit where James Wood pours puts his hand into his stomach and pulls out a gun that is basically all attached to his, like, part of his arm, and then, you know, he's putting his head into the TV where Debbie Harry is, and he's been sucked into the screen. You know, it's got that kind of worry about snuff movies that was sort of a big worry again in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, where people were really making movies that were filming people being murdered. No, they weren't, but it was in the zeitgeist. This is I love the way that Ralph uses the lyric "Long live the new flesh," which is the tagline from the movie in this. It is cinematic, it is devastatingly dark, it is dreamlike, sort of music that will keep you awake at night. It has textures and layers in the background. Listen carefully, because you won't pick it up with the first time. But the drumming on this particular track is really quite of almost groovy. It has a sort of swing beat. It's really intense, but it has a groove to it, a sort of sound. I don't know how to really describe it, to be honest with you, and I should do, because I describe music for a living. But you know, it's a bit. It has a texture delay. It's not just a straightforward heads down, you know, bum up, sticks in hand. There's a sort of maturity, the way that he plays with the 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 symbols I absolutely love. I mean, you know me, I'm a big symbol fan, and the way that he moves these symbols around is just beautiful. Anyway, moving on to the next one, because I am, as always, you know me, I can rabbit on a million miles an hour. The next track is In Disgust We Trust. This was a short track. It's less than 2 minutes or just under 2 minutes long. It's based on the movie Repulsion by Roman Polanski, the 1965 movie. It's the movie itself is about a girl that moves into an apartment with her friend, and then this girl has her nightmarish sensations are filled with the advancements of men that she doesn't want. It's quite a terrifying portrayal of a young girl in a big city, and of the confinement of a small space where the big space outside is calling you, and how you feel trapped by your sexuality and by the sexuality and the aggression of the sexuality of the people around you. It's one of my favorite movies. I actually studied it at art college. One of the movies that I used as my as part of my art degree. And I really like Roman Polanski. With, you know, take aside his dubious personal life, I actually do love his movies, and his version of Macbeth is brilliant. Anyway, that aside, it's quite short. It's quite thunderous in its music. I love the way that it opens up with the cinema tagline for Repulsion. Again, very cinematic. It's right out of the Rock Pit songbook for me. This sounds like a crossover between Rock Pit and Heads for the Dead. It really does. It has a nice, it's grimity, yet a vulnerability that the movie also has. Because this movie is not about extremity. This movie is about very much like Rosemary's Baby, very much like it's a movie for Italian. There's an Italian giallo movie called Orgasmo, not the American one you're thinking of, the Trey Parker one. No, this is the Italian one, and it's about this sort of 60s worry about mores and what, you know, the pulling apart of young girls' sexuality when they suddenly become not just mothers and wives, but have a sexual life outside of that. And this is what this music is about. It's about that tension and the pull and sway. Beautiful for a quick piece of music. Really, really smart. According to one reviewer, which I read the other day, he hears hints of the theme tune to Dawn of the Mummy in this. And I'd love to know, when I talk to Ralph next, if that's actually the case, because Dawn of the Mummy is an 80s Italian exploitation movie. They basically mix ravenous, flesh-eating zombies, wrap them in bandages, and they just attack people who've opened their tomb. It's just another way of wrapping body horror and gore with a slightly different twist. Brilliant movie, by the way. Love it. Had it on VHS for many years. Had an uncut copy. I loved it. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it again to see if I can rehear it. I couldn't, but doesn't mean it's not there, right? And now we go into the title track, the longest track on the album, Never Ending Night of Terror. Now, this isn't actually based around any particular horror movie as such. This is just an homage to their love for the genre. It's lyrically and spiritually, it's just an overarching love letter to the extremities of 80s slasher movies. You know, there's brilliant guitars, there's great slow parts, there's beautiful composition in it. I cannot speak today. Great composition in it. You know, there's a real sense of, there's almost like a tritone trilling. There's layered textures underneath. There's soundtrack bits. It's orchestrated. It's raw. It starts off really subtly. You think, oh my God, this is a nice, refreshing take on the album. And then 1 minute 20, suddenly bang, you're straight into the horror of the music. And that's exactly how horror movies used to be, right? You know, build, 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 attack. And that's what this sort of thing, this song really does well. Again, as I said, it's not really related to anything, but it is an homage to those movies. And I think in that 7 minutes, it really sums it up. You know, I remember watching trailers as a kid, and they'd always come up, you know, Never Ending Night of Terror. You know, keep reminding yourself it's only a movie, only a movie, only a movie, only a movie, which is classically the tagline for Last House on the Left. And so when I heard that Never Ending Night of Terror, that's what I originally in my head it went straight to. Yes, this is a video nasty advert at the beginning of the video or at the end of the video when you're trying to get the vertical hold and the tracking to stay so that you can see the picture. Otherwise, it's a snowy mess of being watched 1,000 times by a 1,000 grubby machines, as was the brilliantness of VHS and the sort of thing I miss now really do. You know, at least with a bad VHS, it would just, you know, you might just lose a picture for a second. You didn't freeze or pop or lose, suddenly have nothing on there. You know, it's the great con of CD, as my wife likes to make her point, and I now believe her very much so. Then we move on from that brilliant title track, and it's in the right spot on the album, to Give Me Life. Now this one is based on Reanimator, one of my personal favourite movies with Jeff Combs, okay, and Barbara Crampton, who repeat later on in another movie, which we'll talk about. It is based on a short story by H.P. Lovecraft, right? The Herbert West Reanimator. It's a very short story. I really like it though, by the way. I love H.P. Lovecraft stories. It was also produced by Brian Yuzna. Now, Brian Yuzna went on to make a fantastic body movie called Society, which I saw at the cinema when I was 18, and it was outrageous. It's not terrifying. It's not gory. It just has bits in it that give you... It's very unsettling, and one particular scene in it, which I won't give away, is quite stomach-turning. Anyway, this is about a man who wants to reanimate, finds a liquid that reanimates life, dead tissues, and of course the nonsense that goes on and all the kind of nastiness that you can imagine that will go on with this. There's a particular scene with intestines, which again has to be seen to be believed. I think this could have made a perfect soundtrack to the movie. The soundtrack's amazing anyway, of course, but you know, this was directed by Stuart Gordon, and Stuart Gordon went on to make some absolute trash. He would probably admit that, but he also went on to make like movies like this, which are sort of live in our consciousness as horror movie fans forever and ever. Amen. This is creepy. It's one of Peterson's best guitar parts, I think. Him and Miloto's are just I say his name wrong, but you know who I mean. It's that kind of, there's a sort of eeriness that they bring to their extremity. There's a lilt to lightness as well. It's just not all about punching you in the face. The movie itself is very much like that. There's a lot of humour in Stuart Gordon's movies. Reanimator being one of them, bringing back to life a dead cat, bringing back to life the head of your enemy, all that kind of thing. You know, they went on to make Bride of Reanimator, another classic movie. So, you know, this is another Prometheus story, isn't it? It's another Frankenstein retelling. It seems to be something that humanity is constantly thinking about, reanimating life. It is actually one of my favourites on the album, and so far, I think one of the most accomplished songs they've ever made. A big call for a lot of fans of Heads of the Dead, but this for me is the case. You know, it was originally, I didn't know this until I did the research, but Stuart Gordon originally wrote this movie as a stage play, and then thought of an idea for a short TV program, like a one-off special. So, you know, I'm quite... I'd love to have seen how that went. Now, it was released several versions in America, as I said before, unrated X and butchered. I saw it originally butchered because I saw it on the cinema in the UK at the Scala Cult Cinema in King's Cross, good old days. And then I went and saw it again, a late night Splatfest festival, uncut, and it was something that
it has to be seen to be believed. It's a shocking movie, but at the same time, quite fun and really out there, right? And it's a great way of they've musically attached perfectly to it. We move then to The Harvester. Now, I think when I listen to this, that The Harvester has related itself to the movie Children of the Corn. Okay, not every song on this album is related to a movie. I just think this one is related to Children of the Corn because the harvester, and then it talks about taking souls. I mean, it could be something else. I mean, I'd love to know your opinion once you've listened to it, to tell me what movie you think it is. It's quite dark. It's tragic. It's Meletti and Pedersen have gone again. That kind of stab and thrust of guitar. It's a very intense piece of music, but it also has that. The reason I say it reminds me of Children of the Corn because it has this kind of Midwesty eeriness to it, a bit like Children of the Damned. Okay, the movie itself was based on a Stephen King book. He produced it. It was made in 1984. It's not a huge success for him. But then a lot of Stephen King movies are actually big flops. I think the only one that really did well is The Shining, to be brutally honest, or maybe Pet Sematary. The book was from 1977, and it's about this community of kids that trick adults passing by, and they murder them to the god that walks amongst the corn. He who walks amongst the corn, to make sure that that they get a better harvest. It's very pagan, very at that time, for King, because that around that time we were getting movies like The Wicker Man, and there was a lot of that paganistic horror, Dunwich horror, and things like that were out, and Blood and Satan's Claw, a Hammer movie, which is also very similar kind of concept. It was it's quite earnest and it's quite dark. It's not by no means is my favorite. I've seen it a few times. Watched it with my dad, probably the first time on late night TV when I was about 12 or 13. I remember Molokai, the character Molokai, scaring me. The young boy, the dark-haired one, he was a bit terrifying. But outside of that, not a movie that really lives in my consciousness. But I do link it with the name Harvester, probably because it's got Harvester in the name. I don't know. Could be about something else. Itself, though, is quite, as I said, dark, foreboding. There's a pomp and circumstance about it. There's a real clatter and clutter and smish and smash of sounds, and I really enjoy that in this track. It's not my favourite by any means, but it's not the worst. It's by no means is it a terrible track. But it's probably because I'm associating it now with Children of the Corn, and I'm not a Children of the Corn fan. There you go. I've said it. I can't say it again. Now, The Shape of Light Bleeds Black, which is the next track, is based on another Stuart Gordon movie and another H.P. Lovecraft movie, From Beyond. I absolutely love this music. I actually think I really like Stuart Gordon movies. He's got this sort of playful, plastic, rubbery joyfulness to his direction and his characters. Again, you've got Jeff Coombs and you've got Barbara Crampton in it. In fact, Barbara Crampton in Black Bondage Gear. We won't say much more than that, but you just have to see it to believe it, really. It's about a man who taps into another dimension. This doctor who wants he wants to see what no one else sees. It consumes him, and then he becomes part of that world around the aliens that are all in the air that you don't see. Right, very much H.P. Lovecraft, very much so. And and Jeffrey Coombs is his assistant, and he finds him with his head bitten off. And there's a great line. It just says, "They bit his head clean off." I absolutely love it. And then it sort of, as Jeffrey Coombs tries to reenact the science, the experiment, Barbara Crampton, his assistant, she starts to, another character in the movie, she gets very sexualized. It becomes very, very carnal, very lustful, because the doctor that has gone over into the other side is become open with his sexual beast, and there's all this beautiful beautiful creature effects, physical creature effects in it, absolutely amazing. And then it got his pineal gland, so he can see. So you can see these different dimensions. Your pineal gland has to, which is in your brain, has to expand, and you see it come out of his. Oh, it's just brilliant. It's colourful. It's splattery. It's bright. It's just brilliant, and the music itself, I think, matches it. There's a sort of buoyancy, a bright colourfulness to this track, a sort of technicolor madness. The cymbal work here is just wonderful. There's a dissonance and a change in mood when you hear this track. It really becomes, I keep using the word cinematic, but they have really captured that here. This cinematic vibe, the bright, bold, primary colours of the creatures in From Beyond, the morphing Doctor, that he's all deformed and mishmashes of everything, of all the universe and the creatures around him, and he's covered in goo, and he's just this being, this wonderful being that lives around us but we cannot see, and it makes it a little bit more terrifying, and again something that H.P. Lovecraft was very much part of. All right, this was the really part of the video store phenomena. It went straight to video in the UK. I don't remember it getting a cinema release. Again, it was written by Brian Yuzna. It was a co-production with Italy, because it was also Penny Pelottoli also wrote it. And if I've said that wrong, I apologise. It sort of harped back, and it harps back as a movie and musically to the co-productions that Dario Argento and Lucio Fulci and George Romero all did. All those co-productions, that's the masters of cinematic horror when they connected to each other. The madness of Italy and the money of America. It's just wonderful. So, where do we go straight from here? Now, we go to the very last. This is a great way of leaning in to what I just mentioned. This one's based on Dawn of the Dead. The great, the wonderful, the brilliant Dawn of the Dead. Okay, or Zombie 2 in some countries. This was a American-Italian co-production between Dario Argento and George A. Romero. The soundtrack was by the wonderful Goblin, the progressive rock band that made horror movie soundtracks. I've done an episode on them. Please go back and listen to it. Special effects by Tom Savini. He also did stunts. He also acted in it. It's a follow-on from Night of the Living Dead, where people are fleeing for survival. This group of people land on the top of a shopping mall, think they're safe in there because the doors are all locked, but the people inside the mall are, the zombies get in because they go to a place they gather where they had the most fun in life, where they had most purpose, and that was shopping. So this is actually a play on consumerism again by George Romero. It is bloody, it is bright. It's got it's got forehead explosions, it's got screwdrivers in the ears, it's got arms being pulled off on an arm wrestling machine, it's got gun munching, it's got zombies, it's got, you name it, it has it. It is, I think, Tom Savini's finest hour. He will tell you that he thinks that Maniac possibly was, but no, I think Maniac was the most atrocious movie that he made. I think it's the most unsettling and nasty movie. He went too far. But Dawn of the Dead had this sense of, there's only one effect in it that really, the zombie that gets the top of his head cut off with the helicopter blades, which is a little bit suspect. The blood was a bit pink, and he even admits that when it was filmed, it wasn't red. It was the stock they used. They used Eastman stock, and it made the blood go a little bit pink. I think that adds to some of the playfulness of it. This music itself opens with the movie catch line, which for Dawn of the Dead, I don't want to spoil it for you. I want you to listen to it. It really, Ralph here, he I don't know if it's him or other members of the band, but they're making zombie noises. You can hear it in the background as if they're lurching ever so slowly and, forlornly towards their, their rotting bodies, towards where their hunger for flesh to keep them going. It's quite a dramatic piece of music, and it goes very much so with the movie. The movie itself is spawned in different lengths and different versions of it. There is the Argento version, which is 6 minutes shorter than the American version. The American version has a slightly different soundtrack, has a different edit to it. I personally like George Romero's director's cut, but I also like Argento's director's mix. I love the soundtrack. In fact, I have it on vinyl. One of my favorite movies of all time. One of my favorite soundtracks. When there is no more room in hell, the dead shall walk the earth. Just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then, of course, he followed on with the madness of Day of the Dead. People don't like Day of the Dead. I think it's again a topic for a different day, but certainly one of my favorites. But Dawn is iconic. It's up there with any survival movie you've ever seen. It has all the characters there. There's infighting, there's madness, there's humor, there's terror, there is sadness, there's love loss. It's pretty amazing movie. And again, the music here has a real blend of brutality and whimsy, which I love with Heads for the Dead. And finally, I know you're going, my God, Tony, it's 1 hour and 12 minutes already. And finally, we're going to get to Witch Creek. Witch Creek is based on one of my favorite directors of all time, Dario Argento's wonderful 1977 movie Suspiria. Not the remake. Although the remake I'm not a fan of. People absolutely love it. Myself, leaves me a bit cold. But the original 1977 Dario Argento movie. Now, Dario Argento, for those of you who don't know, I've mentioned a minute ago, don't know who he is. He's an Italian film director who makes beautiful, absolutely beautiful cinema. The colours, the movement, the spacing, the settings, the camera angles, the textures, the layers of extreme graphic colours. It's just, and the soundtrack and the editing, it's just a thing of beauty. He really is. He's made some unbelievable movies in his time. This was part of a 3-part trilogy with, they call it the Three Mothers trilogy, okay? It was this, and along with Inferno, which was made not far afterwards, and the later movie, Mother of Tears, is the Three Mothers trilogy. He also made things like Tenebrae, Phenomena, Deep Red, which is a brute of a movie, beautiful. Some of the camera angles and some of the camera stuff that he was doing, like for the dog attack in the square, it's just mind blowing as a film lover. The fall into the room of barbed wire in this movie, which is so icky and so horrible because you could just feel those razor cuts as she struggles, and it gets worse and worse and worse. It's just quite it's quite unsettling, and all of it. There are hints back to Carrie sometimes with this, with woman when she falls through the glass, hanging by the neck, covered in blood, through the ceiling. There's Fritz Lang imagery in here. He once said quite. He once said quite aptly that he'd rather see a beautiful woman die slowly than an ugly woman die fast. Now, that will upset people, but that's the way he said it, and I think maybe just for shock value, I don't know. A friend of mine, I met him. I didn't meet Dario Argento, but he was in the same room at a signing, and my mate got a butcher's knife signed by him in red lipstick. And from all intents and purposes, it's still on his wall now, Mark's wall now. It may still be there. Who knows? This was a very long time ago. I was very, very impressed, and I was very young, and I didn't want to go and say hello or do anything because it was a different iteration of me, and I wasn't that forward. So, if you want beautiful cinema with intensity and gore, but in a beautifully way shot and really creative way of killing people, we only have to mention the piano scene in Deep Red. I will not say any more. These scenes, he makes it beautiful. I mean, he's not just a horror movie director. I mean, in fact, I don't even know if I call them horror movies. It's a very difficult one because not everything was shock, though. I mean, he made Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which is a brilliant giallo cinema, piece of giallo cinema. Giallo is Italian for yellow. It's the little books of mad sort of detective stories, and usually full of sex and sleaze. Anyway, giallo as in yellow. But the music itself, it seems to not copy, but it incorporates Goblin's theme tune to Suspiria. And if you listen carefully, Peterson has really managed to sort of change it enough, but keep its sense of originality. You still hear that wonderful Goblin soundtrack that makes Suspiria such a brilliant movie. I took my oldest daughter to see it at the Film and Sound Archive here, and it was meant to be originally Dario Argento's original print he brought over to Australia, but they lost it. Would you believe? They lost it in transit, and so we saw a DVD print of it. Still, doesn't matter. It was on the big screen. I would have loved to have seen. I saw Argento's original and personal print. Would be something special for me to say, but it didn't happen. Anyway, the music, as I've said before in other episodes, Goblin makes brilliant horror movie music, perfect for him and Argento. They just seem to. The band and Argento seem to blend and mold so beautifully. When Argento in his later movies, with where he co-produced movies like Demons and Demons 2, again a fun ride. Take your eyes on that this Halloween. You're going to love those. You just don't do it around while you're eating dinner. That's all I'm going to say. But this is a fabulous way to end the album. It's a fabulous way to say we love these horror movies. This is part of us, because it's from a time now that's gone. Now there's a lot of torture porn with things like Saw and Hostel. The ability to create real tense horror that isn't just jump scares is sort of become a dead thing. There are movies out there like The Void. I'd like you to, as a note, that you still use physical effects. Those movies themselves, they don't do just jump scares. They build and they create tension, and they're terrifying. And this is what you get from movies like Argento's Suspiria. You don't get that from Fulci. You don't get that from Diodato. You don't get that from all the Italian Umberto Lenzi movies. You don't get that from them. You just, and Sean Cunningham movies and all that. You just get visceral shock. But there's something quite primal about that. And that's, again, I think this album sums it up. It's quite a primal album. It has quite a visceral ability to connect with its movies. I hope that you get to listen to it this Halloween. Please do. It's on all streaming platforms. I will have the wonderful Ralph on the show again soon to talk about it. Hopefully sometime in November, maybe early December. We'll see. Anyway, bye for now, guys. That was Heads for the Dead's Never-Ending Night of Terror and April 16th's Sleepwalking. And we'll talk to you soon. A big special episode coming up, as I said, for the Halloween episode. So keep your eyes peeled and your ears open for that news. And please do go and like and subscribe on all streaming platforms. I really need it, guys. We need to get out to a bigger audience. The more like and subscribe, the more responses I get, the bigger audience I get. And I want to keep doing this. Thank you for being with us for this marathon. And remember, look under your beds, in your cupboards, and lock your doors. And whatever you do, keep telling yourself it's only a movie. It's only a movie. It's only an album. It's only an album.